Welcome to today's Explainer. I'm your host, an independent political analyst, and we're bringing you this breakdown straight from the Radiant podcast, produced by Anthony Carroll. Today, we're jumping right into a totally fascinating, deeply researched piece by Tangle founder Isaac Saul. He's diving deep into media double standards, political accountability, and a story of alleged corruption that honestly seems to be operating right out in the open. As analysts who really care about the integrity of our institutions, we need to take an objective look at Saul's findings. What actually happens when the sheer volume of news just completely paralyzes our ability to demand accountability? Let's get into it. To really wrap our heads around the political dynamic at play here, Saul hooks us with a super relatable psychological observation about his own family, specifically his oldest brother. So Saul describes his brother as having this incredible, honestly kind of baffling gift. He can say the absolute most incendiary, wildly inappropriate things at literally the perfect moment, and somehow he gets a hearty laugh from absolutely everyone in the room. We're talking about a guy who used to essentially talk his way out of being grounded as a kid, and as an adult has this sheer audacity to get a priest to crack a smile right in the middle of a funeral. It's just an innate, deeply disarming ability. Okay, let's dive into this. Saul takes this super personal observation about his brother and uses it to set up his core analytical thesis about our current political climate. He asks, why is it that some political figures face complete and utter ruin for scandals, while others seem to get a total pass for doing, frankly, much worse? He points out that when other people try to replicate his brother's inappropriate jokes, even in the exact same context, taking the exact same approach, they get absolutely disastrous results. The joke falls flat, the room gets angry. And Saul argues that this exact same psychological phenomenon applies directly to our political landscape. The delivery, the audience's expectation, and a politician's established brand, those things completely alter what they're allowed to get away with in the public eye. And this brilliantly illustrates the glaring double standard Saul is pointing out. I mean, just imagine a hypothetical headline where Hunter Biden is negotiating a Biden-branded luxury hotel with Syrian billionaires who are, at the exact same time, lobbying his father to lift economic sanctions. That story, it would dominate every single news network on Earth for years. There's no way around it. Yet, Saul notes that when the New York Times reported that President Trump's children were actively engaged in this exact scenario, literally negotiating a luxury hotel with Syrian billionaires lobbying the president for sanctions relief, the public reaction was incredibly muted. It barely made a ripple. Saul's analysis really forces us to stop and ask, why doesn't the reality land with the same earth-shattering punch as the hypothetical? Now, to be perfectly clear on where this perspective is actually coming from, Saul is a political moderate. He thoroughly investigated the Hunter Biden scandals during the Biden administration, and he didn't just brush them off, not at all. He found the details surrounding Hunter's laptop, the suppressed stories and the gun charges to be incredibly alarming. He points out that Hunter Biden drew a salary of $50,000 a month while his father was vice president, and allegedly tried to arrange business ventures to cut his dad into once he left office. For Saul, those were very real concerns. They absolutely deserved the immense public and legal scrutiny that they got. Let's move to and see how this builds when we contrast that $50,000 a month salary with the multi-billion-dollar business ventures currently being launched by the current president's children. Saul highlights a crucial, absolutely vital distinction here. These multi-billion-dollar ventures are being launched while the president is actively sitting in the Oval Office. He's actively holding the levers of state power. So the author argues that we aren't just looking at a difference in scale here, we're looking at a completely different magnitude of alleged self-dealing. And it's happening in real time. Now, fulfilling our duty as concerned political analysts to follow the data, what's really interesting about this list we've compiled is how it outlines specific examples of alleged self-dealing occurring just in the first 15 months of the current term. We're talking about reports of luxury hotel negotiations with sanctioned foreign billionaires, explicit exchanges of foreign policy concessions, trading domestic policy victories, even literal pardons allegedly being traded to facilitate massive business deals. When you look at these examples compiled together, the author argues that the sheer brazenness of these allegations comes sharply, undeniably into focus. And, perhaps the most remarkable part of this entire situation is that the administration isn't really trying to hide it. During an interview with the New York Times, President Trump openly stated that nobody cared when he tried to separate his family business from his administration during his first term. So his logic? He simply isn't trying to do it now. As analysts, we have to impartially report what the source material states. The merging of private, family, business enrichment, and public government policy is, at this juncture, an openly admitted, freely acknowledged strategy. So naturally, you've got to ask, why is there no widespread outrage? Why aren't the alarms absolutely ringing off the hook? Well, Saul points to what we can call the accountability vacuum. First off, there is intense, widespread news fatigue. There are just so many allegations constantly flying around that the electorate is simply tuning it all out, really just to preserve their own sanity. And second, Congress is providing absolutely zero oversight. According to Saul's analysis, the majority party has opted for complete and utter fealty to the administration. When the very institutions that were designed to provide checks and balances just stop asking questions, Saul warns that we're setting a dangerous precedent, where the public just assumes there's nothing worth questioning anymore. The contrast in institutional response between then and now is honestly pretty jarring. Think back to the rigorous past oversight during the Biden administration. The Department of Justice actively investigated the president's son, and Republicans in Congress conducted years-long probes into his business ties. And Saul argues, hey, that is exactly how the system is supposed to work. In stark contrast, the current climate shows an administration that has actively dismantled many of the federal watchdogs responsible for prosecuting fraud and grift. According to the source, without a single unified statement of concern from even a handful of senators in the majority party, the structural mechanisms for formal legal accountability have basically been shut down. Because there are no indictments, no congressional investigations, and no public hearings to adjudicate the facts, everyday citizens and independent journalists are left entirely in the dark. We're forced to rely on random administration leaks, isolated investigative reporting, and basic logical principles like Occam's razor just to figure out what our government is actually doing. If you aren't familiar with it, Occam's razor is a philosophical principle that says when you're presented with two competing theories, the simpler explanation is usually the correct one. So the crucial point is, how do we apply Occam's razor to these real-time events? Saul gives a really chilling, specific example of the kind of shady activity slipping right under the radar. Imagine a scenario where an anonymous investor places a massive, highly risky financial bet on oil prices exactly 20 minutes before the president unexpectedly announces a geopolitical ceasefire. Now applying the razor, which scenario is actually likelier? That this investor just got extraordinarily historically lucky on a pure blind guess? Or that they had illicit insider knowledge of the administration's foreign policy moves? Without federal watchdogs to investigate, we are left to deduce the uncomfortable answers all by ourselves. Which brings us to the ultimate question Saul asks, and honestly one we all must deeply reflect upon. Can anyone actually process this level of self-dealing, corruption, and shadiness at once? Are we existing in this collective stupor, completely blinded by the sheer volume and audacity of these unprecedented events? It's an absolutely vital question for the health and survival of our political system. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm your host, Christina, wrapping up another explainer brought to you by the Radiant Podcast, produced by Anthony Carroll. Keep questioning the narrative, keep relying on the data, and I'll see you on the next explainer.